All right, I think we're ready to kick off this event tonight. Welcome, welcome, and welcome to everybody that's here. My name is Bas Nabolsi, and I'm the chairman of the board of the World Affairs Forum. We're hosting this event tonight, and we couldn't be more proud and honored to be part of this evening's discussion. I've got a couple of slides just to introduce you to the World Affairs Forum and to say a few thank yous, and then we'll move right on to the reason that you joined us tonight. The World Affairs Forum has been around since the late 1940s. We have several hundred members pre-COVID. We've struggled a little bit during COVID. And we provide a forum for people to connect with the world. We have speakers, we have events where we're able to network. We have First Mondays discussions where smaller groups get together and discuss issues of common interest. Boy, I've got my slides out of order, so let's see what's up here. Here's a slide that shows some of our more recent events, just to give you a flavor of the types of topics we've covered and the speakers that we've been able to host. Since the arrival of COVID, we've been primarily hosting our events on Zoom, but we've transitioned to more hybrid events, and our program committee has been prescient over the years in identifying topics and speakers that, as the months play out, turn to be right on point when they arrive. So we would welcome your interest and participation. This highlights kind of what our mission is, and I've been part of the organization for about 15 years. I've met people that I now count as my closest friends, and the conversations have always brought to light things that I hadn't thought about, expanding my interests and just fulfilling a dream that I've had to be more connected with the world. I would like to thank our sponsors of the World Affairs Forum, and I'd want to extend a couple of extra thank yous while this slide is up there. I'd like to thank the Greenwich Academy for hosting us tonight. Beautiful facility, and it's a privilege to be here. I want to thank the volunteers that have helped us today, the board and friends of the board that have been here to welcome you. And I'd also like to particularly thank Kay Maxwell, who's here, a former executive director, who's going to be helping me to field questions, and also Megan Torrey and her friend Nicole, or her colleague Nicole, who's traveled down from our sister organization in Hartford to be part of this event today. So in closing, I'd ask you all to silence your phones. I'd observe that when this slide was created, we thought we would be fielding calls from our broadcast, the Zoom, the hybrid part of this, but instead all the questions will come from the floor here, and we'll be, to the extent we have time, giving you an opportunity to ask questions as well. So with that, it's so nice to see everybody. There are familiar faces in the crowd, but many new faces, and it's just a privilege to be here with all of you tonight. The screen is going to go up while I leave the stage. Richard Lukaj is going to come up and introduce himself and our esteemed guest. So thank you very much for being here, and enjoy the evening.
It's officially evening. First of all, thank you all for coming. My name is Richard Lukaj. I am a recently retired board member of the World Affairs Forum, so I'm reminiscing about a lot of things as I'm here tonight. First, my daughter actually used to perform on this stage until she graduated last year. So it's a particularly emotional room for me, and my wife, I'm sure. In addition, one of my old colleagues, Jim Massey, in fact, this hall is named after him. So it's also another fond memory of a great mentor of mine and someone I hold in the highest regard. I am honored and extremely privileged to have the opportunity to introduce our speaker tonight. Honestly, I have so many different angles I could take on this, but I'm going to take a very deeply personal one. Albin Kurti, to many of you, is well known, and his story is an unusual one. He also has a rare attribute in the sense that both my kids' generation, my generation, and my dad's generation all seem to like him. It's very rare among politicians. And, I would also say that his story was not one of privilege, but his family originates from a very modest village, one that we're also very familiar with because his dad and my dad went to the same elementary school and grew up in the same village. And who would have thought some years later we would be here in this little village of Greenwich meeting again to talk about the times of our day, another generation later. So I would like to keep my remarks very brief because I don't think I can say anything that will justify the speaker, or do justice to the speaker, I should say. And I think I would like to hear his remarks. And in some respects, despite the fact that we're competing today with this unbelievable weather outside and all kinds of other activities, hundreds of you, both here in person and live on stream, as I understand it, have made time to be here with us today. And I'd like to see if we can maximize the time for the interactions with you all. And we'll save much of the time, or as much of the time as possible, for the Q&A. Without much further ado, I'd like to invite our Prime Minister from Kosovo here and to the podium. But before he comes up, I want to also thank the entire delegation from Kosovo, who has done a marathon as we've been sort of tracking online their travels. At first, I was thinking about all the delegations of Albanian diaspora who have gone to the region and do very similar kinds of marathons, but then I actually thought in my mind that we have to take those exhausting marathon trips and multiply them by thousands of additional miles in order to make them equivalent. So this is the tail end of what has been an extraordinary week, and just trailing it online and watching the media attention to the event has been by itself tiring, and really in some respects as an Albanian diaspora it's been also pride filling with the achievements that they've achieved this week. So without further ado, Mr. Prime Minister.
Good evening, everyone. It's a great pleasure and honor to be here tonight with you. Thank you very much, Mr. Lukaj. 2 weeks ago, I arrived in US. It has been 8 years since I came here last time, and what I can promise is that it will not take not even 8 months before I return. I am flying back to Europe tomorrow afternoon, and these have been 2 great weeks where we met a lot of people, spent a lot of energy, but I must say that whenever we meet people, we always more get from people than we give to them. And understanding politics as service, this only makes our responsibility even more important. We arrived on the occasion of launching of negotiations with Millennium Challenge Corporation in Washington, D.C., and that has been a very special moment for us. The CEO of MCC is Madam Alice Albright, the daughter of late Madeleine Albright, Secretary of State. Alice is helping us develop our country, continuing the job of her mother, who helped us so much in liberating our country. That's why it was very special for us to start these negotiations, which will be concluded with a program, compact program of $236 million for energy sector in Kosovo. Battery storage and trainings, especially for women in the field of energy. From Washington and DC, we flew to San Francisco, California. It was my first time going to West Coast. I've never been before to West Coast. I've just seen it in the movies, you know, Golden Gate when James Stewart takes Kim Novak away from water, or when Steve McQueen in a famous car chase is trying to do his best up and down the asphalt valley of San Francisco in the film Bullet. In Silicon Valley, we managed to meet many of the business leaders with the idea of bringing them to Kosovo by putting our country into the map of global expansion strategy of these big corporations. And I must say that it was not difficult to present and represent our country. We did pretty well in last year. There has been an impressive double-digit economic growth of 10.53% of GDP. Exports increased by 83%, foreign direct investment by 22%, capital investments by 10%. Annual state budget this year is 26% higher than in 2020. We also did manage exemplarily well pandemic COVID-19, having the lowest death rate in the region and the highest vaccination rate. And we did not keep the growth for ourselves. We distributed it among the people with different social policies. Namely, we increased pensions by 11%, for disabled by 33%. We made public education free of charge at all levels, including university level. Introduced child and maternity allowances. And in this way, economic growth is being escorted with social justice. In particular, we are proud with the increase of tax revenues by 34% without changing fiscal policy. I guess when people are optimistic and hopeful, they rather spend than save. Plus, when they see that there is no corruption in the government, they are more ready to pay taxes. Kosovo is a successful story, not only in political terms, but also in the economic ones. That is why presenting the case of our country to potential foreign investors was not that difficult after all. Exports grew in wood and metal processing, agriculture, especially food and beverage, but also leather and textile. However, our emphasis was for IT sector, information technology. There are 650 companies in Kosovo in IT sector. 10% of them are foreign ownership. 21% mixed local international one. And 70% of these companies do export outside Kosovo, and 60% of the overall products that they put in the market are for exports. There are 20,000 experts working in these companies. In Kosovo, we have 2,000 students graduating each year in 10 different universities in IT field, and another 4,000 are being trained in different programs, including some of them being financed by our government. This economic growth is a direct outcome of democratic changes. So Kosovo is an example that democracy and economy go together, hand in hand. Qualitative democracy brings economic growth. And this is very important because we live at times when there are certain autocracies which want to show that economic development does not need democracy. But we believe otherwise. We believe that economic development and democracy need each other very much so. We came out number one regarding rule of law in the Balkan region, according to the World Justice Project. And we moved upwards by 17 places when it comes to press freedom, according to Reporters Without Borders. And likewise, we rose by 17 places in ranking regarding Corruption Perception Index of Transparency International. We have established commercial courts in order to swiftly resolve any eventual disagreements in business. And I believe that this trip will be very fruitful in the months and years to come for investments in Kosovo. But when we went to Silicon Valley in California, we understood that there is another Silicon Valley in the making in Texas. So we flew to Texas and then to state of Iowa, to Chicago, to Michigan, and to Rhode Island, Massachusetts, New York, Connecticut, all together in 10 states within 2 weeks. And I guess this is so also because the person who was planning this trip in US is from Kosovo. So they were planning as if we have to do with municipalities of Kosovo and not the states of the United States. However, we managed to stay alive and do well. And to be honest, I prefer and like to stand rather than sit, because whenever I sit, it feels like the chair is moving. I feel like I'm in the car or in the airplane. Today, we are here to conclude our trip with the best of memories and with high expectations. We are hopeful that investments in Kosovo will grow further. And I was not inviting American Albanian diaspora and American businessmen to contribute to Kosovo by sacrificing, but to contribute by profiting. Kosovo is a country where you can profit. And we need offshoring, outsourcing, nearshoring more than ever before, and the time has never been more ripe than now. The other goal of our trip was security for Kosovo. Besides investments in Kosovo, also security for Kosovo. Since the illegal, unjustified, unprovoked military aggression and invasion of Russian Federation in Ukraine, there has been a tectonic shift when it comes to geopolitics and geoeconomics. However, we didn't have any dilemmas from the very first day. We harshly condemned Russian invasion. We joined immediately all the sanctions of the United States and EU towards Russian Federation, and we pledged to receive up to 5,000 refugees from Ukraine, including 20 journalists, and so far 3 journalists from Ukraine already became residents of our capital town, Pristina. Beforehand, we received close to 1,500 refugees from Afghanistan, and around 5% of them are nowadays in Kosovo. In one hand, it is our humanitarian duty to receive refugees, and on the other hand, it is a partnership kind of duty on our side in relation to the United States. In the United States, we see an indispensable ally, a true friend, and a decisive partner. And that is why our cooperation will last forever, but we are trying to broaden and deepen it with economic cooperation, trade exchange, and regarding security and defense matters. Besides increasing the budget of our country for agriculture, I've increased it also for defense by 52%. And we want to cooperate with the United States to this goal of ours. Kosovo is not in NATO, but NATO is in Kosovo. And Kosovo and NATO are part of each other's history, present and future times. We need the help of the United States to join the Partnership for Peace program of NATO towards becoming full members of NATO alliance. On the other hand, we also need support of the United States to make sure that in the times to come, Serbia and its closest ally, Russian Federation, will not dare to attack Kosovo. To this end, I have explained thoroughly to American friends and colleagues from both White House and the Hill about strong ties between Belgrade and Moscow. I think that they understand very well how important is not only NATO for Kosovo, but also Kosovo for NATO. Especially, I've enjoyed meeting our young professionals from Diaspora, because besides investments in Kosovo, we also need the know-how, the knowledge, the expertise, the work ethics of our hard-working and smart women and men in the United States. Board of directors, managements of independent state agencies, publicly owned enterprises, of the governance in central and local level, all of these, they need all of you. That is why I am not calling our diaspora for, let's say, mandatory military service, but for voluntary civil service. From 6 months to a year to 2 years to come in Kosovo and contribute there within the next 5 years. Whenever you can, at your convenience, please contact us, because there is place and space for you to contribute. I believe that you will also gain new experience, and our democratic state building and socioeconomic development would benefit alike. That's why, with this call that I'm making, bear in mind that for our diaspora, you do not have to come to Kosovo and knock at the government's building door, because we have removed away the door altogether. That's why, for our diaspora, we say, don't come knocking. Thank you very much.
Hello? All right. So I don't know if you all caught this, but the Prime Minister did say he enjoyed meeting the young professionals, and I didn't hear any remark about the old ones like me. So first, let me just take another minute to thank Bas and Kay and Marty and Jessica, most of all, for the incredible efforts that it took to put this together on a beautiful day like this in incredibly short notice. So thank you once again. Join me with a round of applause. So one of the ways that I learned about this delegation's trip having an unusual impact was I received a certain email from one of our two daughters, unexpectedly, asking about perhaps spending next summer in Kosovo. And, you know, a number of my friends and I, we were among the founders of this American university in Kosovo, and now known as the RIT Kosovo. And I'd been for years promoting her and her sister to go and enjoy the experience, and I bragged about the fact that the summer program, in fact, has actual diplomats that were involved in peacemaking post-war. I bragged about the caliber of those people. I bragged about the opportunity to understand a new democracy being born from scratch. I bragged about the economic progress. I bragged about all kinds of youthful statistics, like the average age of the country is 25, so the whole country feels cool and young. I did all of this and more, and never resonated. So my first question to the Prime Minister is, what did he say in Chicago that represented something to her that connected in a way that I could never do?
In Chicago, we met with a company called UCX, which has more workers in Kosovo than in Chicago. And that was extraordinary for me. I thought we have to make people in US and in Kosovo know much more about this. In Chicago, we've met with a group of businesswomen and businessmen, and it was very clear that there was mutual enthusiasm for the growth and development to come. Their university knowledge was meeting with practical skills. Some studying economics, some doing business, definitely building a bridge that we should cross over as often as we can. That setting gave me a lot of food for thought, and I learned a lot from them. It was a kind of a setting in which I was supposed to speak and tell them things, but I felt guilty with a bad conscience because I'm almost sure that I've learned most from all of them. And this kind of meeting where people with hard labor gain their wealth on one hand, and incredible students in whose eyes you can see hopeful future for all of us, is a winning combination. That's why I believe that businessmen like Mr. Lukaj and great students like Leah, his daughter, are the right way forward.
So, you know, most people, particularly in the United States, when they think of Kosovo, only have memories and images that actually resemble more or less what we're seeing in the Ukraine today. It's all of these tragic moments with tragic events, with words like ethnic cleansing being associated, and it's all true. However, it's almost 30 years ago, or 20 some odd years ago. And the images we're seeing today are still fresh for many of us in the diaspora who were critically engaged at that moment in time, and perhaps even more devastating as images to those who lived it, like the Prime Minister and his colleagues and many of his predecessors. As we look at these images today, the Balkans remains still a place with unresolved justice. We have a tension in neighboring Bosnia that is impossible to ignore at the moment, and we have approximately approaching 50 bases of armed military capability on the Serb-Kosovo border that resembles a lot of what you saw as the buildup between Russia and the Ukraine border. These images, with the current backdrop, certainly leave a lot of concern in our community. What's your read, Mr. Prime Minister, on these images of today? How do they project what's to come in the region?
I think that all of us who showed solidarity and admiration and sympathy and empathy with the people of Ukraine and President Zelensky were very happy when the Russian blitzkrieg failed in Ukraine. And definitely Russian blitzkrieg has failed in Ukraine. However, we should not forget that we have already over 12 million refugees in Ukraine. 6 million of them already outside Ukraine, and another 6 million as internally displaced people. This, besides thousands of them who got killed and thousands more who got wounded or injured. When you add millions of lost jobs and the material devastation, definitely we should not celebrate too soon, not just because war is still not over. That's why I believe that people of Ukraine need all the help that they can get and we can give in order to put a very simple equation in place, and that is peace equals victory. Victory of Ukraine is peace in Europe. Around border of Kosovo with Serbia, we have, as Rich was mentioning, close to 50 forward operation bases. More precisely, 28 of them are military forward operation bases and 20 are those of Gendarmeria. Each one of them has 50 to 150 armed people. It's like a horseshoe. During spring 1999, this horseshoe was inside Kosovo, expelling 860,000 people to Albania, Montenegro, or North Macedonia. Now, this horseshoe is outside our borders. It is worrisome, but we're not afraid. What I've been asking with American officials and representatives is demilitarization of a several miles long stripe of land around our border. The other thing which I believe should happen is to close down so-called humanitarian Russian center in Niš, which is 100 miles from my office in Pristina. And the center for Sputnik in Western Balkans is in Belgrade. There is an office of Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation inside the building of the Ministry of Defense of Serbia in Belgrade. Gazprom owns 56% of shares in oil industry of Serbia. They've been receiving military equipment from Belarus, China, and Russian Federation. I believe in the thesis of perpetual peace by German philosopher Immanuel Kant, written almost 230 years ago, which basically says that democracies do not fight each other. If Russian Federation would have been a democracy, we wouldn't have had an invasion in Ukraine. Kosovo is a democratic country, is the most pro-Western and pro-democratic country in Western Balkans. Instead of allowing despotic President Putin to problematize all NATO members at his borders, we should problematize all autocracies at our borders. They do mention Kosovo every other day. They do so because President Putin considers that NATO intervention in Kosovo in the spring of the year 1999 to stop Serbian genocide led by Milosevic's regime is the most important singular event of international relations since the fall of Berlin Wall. And whereas they consider that US intervention in Iraq and Afghanistan was not successful, they want also Kosovo to fail. And success of Kosovo bothers them a great deal. They don't want to have a live example of a flourishing country out of Western intervention. Kosovo is a joint success of people's labor and resilience, but also of NATO, especially US and EU intervention. Kosovo, as a positive and progressive example, is a big obstacle for their narrative of alternative divisions in this world. I believe they want to continue with this war at least till harsh winter this year, when Kremlin hopes that EU member states will yield to them and unity of the Western democracies will be severely damaged. They are waiting for the time when the prices of the gas will go up and Russian gas will be mentioned just as often as war in Ukraine. That is why it is important for us to work and act as much as possible, as soon as possible, in order to build self-sufficiency before next winter. I remember very well US intervention in Iraq 2003 during the presidency of George W. Bush, when Serbian media in the aftermath started to write how if US goes after Iran, that is going to be window of opportunity for Serbia to take back Kosovo. Therefore, these military and gendarmeria kind of forward operation bases around our border perhaps do not have a degree for attacking us in next weeks of, let's say, 80 or 90%. However, the probability is not zero, and they might be waiting for a diversion of attention by US to some other conflicts that could occur either in Eastern Europe or in the Pacifics, and then use that opportunity to make another aggression to Kosovo. I'm saying this because leadership in Belgrade did not change neither goals nor stance regarding Kosovo. They do not recognize our country, but this is not what hurts me most. The fact that they say that the Rechak massacre of 15th of January 1999 did not take place. This is what offends and hurts me most. But in spite of everything, I believe that we should remain a democratic country which respects human rights and civic rights, in spite of nationality or ethnicity or religion or any kind of background. I never equated in my life people with a state. I do not do that for Serbs and Serbia, just as I do not do that for us, citizens of Kosovo with Kosovo, or Albanians with Kosovo, or Albania for that matter, and so on and so forth. I do not blame citizens, I do not blame people, but state apparatus with non-democratic leadership can cause tragedies again. I emphasize there is no reason to be afraid, but we have all the reasons to be vigilant.
Thank you for that. I'm going to ask one more question, and then I'm going to turn it to the audience for questions as well. My Mickey Mouse watch says we have a few more minutes. My last question really relates to the media in Kosovo, and really the Balkans as a general matter. I had the privilege to visit Kosovo with the late President Clinton, and he received an honorary degree at the University of Pristina, and he actually gave the first lecture at the American University in Kosovo as well, as the professor for a day. And I remember one of the things he said was, things will happen and change will come when the environment is so that it can happen. He didn't use exactly those words, but conceptually, we took upon that mission at AUK, and I think to some degree it started happening in other educational formats in Kosovo as well. But young people suddenly started thinking about life without dwelling on the past. And from that young group of people today are people who own digital broadcasting companies, people who own internet companies, people who own IT outsourcing businesses. I think about some of the grads and post-grads, and I saw Ed Hamill here earlier, young people who also have graduated from these institutions and went on to the London School of Economics, to Harvard, to Yale, to Columbia, and many of whom have found their way back and are now either in collaboration, like UCX and other examples, creating companies that are actually multi-continental in some cases. The other advantage in Kosovo is that people speak English fluently, oftentimes with a Brooklyn accent for some reason. But I think the paradigm of a young professional experience in Kosovo is almost never portrayed in the media there. And I find it intriguing that most of the evening primetime exchanges are about criticizing you or your colleagues, as is appropriate. Media should always be in the opposition, but also, I think media also has a responsibility sometimes to promote the optimism, the hope, the opportunity set, and also as it relates to young people who may also be considering their options domestically and abroad, to maybe see examples that might give them an inspiration, a spark to go pursue something that is indeed possible and happening in many cases. But we still are actually having too many people leaving the region. I mean, especially too many young people that in some cases do not return. And I'd be curious to hear a little bit about what the government is doing in thinking about how to maybe even use this trip and some of the learnings from this trip to create the bridges and the sparks of opportunity that are going to actually consolidate opportunity for people to not only be excited to stay and build and grow, but also to have people sign up for your challenge to come join those young people building those companies and building new opportunities there.
I believe in critical thinking, and I've been criticizing so much previous governments.
That's true too.
And I think that one of the measures of the critique is that it should bring more hope than before critique being unfolded. If there are attacks and assaults with anger and bitterness who bring frustration and depression, that is one of the tests which show that actually you're not dealing with a critique. We have to have hope over cynicism and passion over fear. I did a lot of critique. I activated people, I mobilized them. But the hope was increasing, not decreasing. There is some good critique against us, towards us, and I thank all of those. Where do I see a problem is with certain people who do attacks with half-truths or no truths, for that matter, and whose salaries are higher than of my ministers, and who are just bringing a sort of pessimism and disappointment among the listeners. They don't mobilize anyone. They don't activate youth, women, citizens. They just want to show that everyone's the same and there's no hope whatsoever. Meanwhile, they are either rich or upper middle class. When you add to this the fact that they try to wrap as data or as truths or as facts their opinions, situation becomes a bit dangerous. It is fine to say your opinion very loudly, but not to try to sell it as a fact. In politics, we must have convictions. In politics, we have to think. In politics, we must air our opinions. But we cannot speak opinions and pretend to have facts. This is, I think, what is the danger of our time. There is an Italian author. She has put it in a nice way. Age of information is age of reputation. If we think that we live at times which can be characterized with this expression, age of information, very soon that becomes age of reputation. So people will end up not listening and talking about the content, but about the person who is saying that. Because the trust has been undermined. In order to restore trust, it is very important to go back to critical thinking and to clearly distinguish opinions from facts. I do not have any problems with any kind of opinions. I love critique. To be honest, without critique of the other, I do not get better myself. Because you can never criticize yourself as someone else would do it for me, for us. So, self-critique cannot substitute critique. We need critique in the society. We need a vibrant democracy. The problem is, again, when we have half-truths or no truths being propagated with money machinery behind, and when anger and bitterness of certain opinions are trying to sell themselves as data and news and facts, producing despair and frustration. This is what makes me worry. My last word to this is that the problem with fake news, which has been a very well discussed and elaborated concept in recent years, is not that fake news are fake. The problem is that they are no news. Certain opinions want to become news. And it is up to the critical thinking of civic society, academicians, business community, to not allow them to become news. You can be even fake, no problem. The problem is that fake news are not news. I don't want to dwell on the predicate fake. The freedom of expression implies that you may be wrong in what you say, not necessarily lying. But when you try to put as news your opinions, to put as facts your interests, there is where the problem starts, and we should not let it grow.
Some of that resonates even here in the United States. So with that, we're going to turn the floor to the audience for a question or two.
Hi, this is working. Mr. Kurti, first and foremost, I would like to commend you for all the changes you've made to Kosovo. I'm truly proud. I'm originally from there, from the capital, Pristina. I moved to the US in 2006, and I've been living here ever since. Regardless, I've done a lot of work with youth at the UN, in Europe, in Kosovo. I attended the first youth assembly in 2017 that they organized. And the only thing that I always keep on running into is, how do we bring our knowledge there? Is there a program in place that you guys have now in the administration that we can come and bring our expertise, our knowledge, our soft skills, and kind of integrate that into bringing so much more help and kind of contribute directly to Kosovo? Thank you.
Yeah, what I might suggest is actually, in the interest of time, that we take a few questions and maybe we can address them in sort of a grouping if possible.
Good evening. Hi, Prime Minister. It's like I was so excited to come and see you. And it's, I think it's the first time that we're excited to come see our Prime Minister. So my question is this. We have 3 Albanian Prime Ministers at the time present, and another one just won the election. Does that mean that our God is on our side right now, and it's our time to unite the Albanian regions? That's my question.
One more here.
Mr. Prime Minister, it's a real pleasure. I'll keep this brief. So, Kosovo has, and I don't have to tell you this, has been in a limbo ever since declaring independence for the reasons that there are certain EU members that refuse to recognize our independence. And it seems that we're perpetually stuck in this status until we get that recognition. Has there been any new critical thinking by the youth as to how to address this issue and advance the country forward?
I think he's got a full load. Those are some pretty tough questions, so let's get started with those.
Yes, Prime Minister, you spoke of being in Washington and speaking to people on the Hill and White House representatives. Is Kosovo seeking NATO membership? And my second question is, with the International Monetary Fund saying a third of employable Kosovans are unemployed, what sector of the economy do you see shows the greatest potential to put more of your people back to work? Two questions.
My CTO, Chief Technology Officer, is Lulzania Gjiu, who studied in the United States and was with me in California and in Texas. He will be leading digitalization in Kosovo because we need digitalization across the board: education, healthcare, public administration, industry. And for all those who are in IT sector, he is the right person, for example, to be contacted. Other than that, there are 15 ministries. And I believe that whoever is interested to contribute in governance, freely write, and you will get an answer by a certain ministry or a certain municipality for that matter. In particular, what I would like to see is opening of our university for experts and scholars from US. Because as things stand now, it is very difficult to become a professor in University of Pristina if you're not already a professor in University of Pristina. It's almost a logical fallacy. There is a certain tendency of self-perpetuation of majority of professors there, as if they were a bureaucracy. We need to open university for scholars from abroad, not only Albanians, also Americans, because in this way we would increase the quality of teaching and learning, of consuming knowledge, but also of producing knowledge. Because university is a temple where knowledge also should be produced. But there are all spheres of life with multitude of addresses to which I encourage our diaspora to reach out. Regarding prime ministers in the region who are Albanians, I think they should not serve only Albanians. They should serve all the citizens. But whether God is on our side, that is a bit of a difficult question to answer. Not just because I do not dare to judge God. So I think that this is a progress in terms of open-minded people, democratically oriented, who lead the highest state institutions. And to conclude, I believe that more we cooperate as democratic leaders, it will be more difficult for the autocrats to get stronger any further. Because autocrats might be separated from their own people, but they cooperate very well among each other. And we've seen in Eastern Europe certain gentlemen's clubs of autocrats who really brought some dark projects from the past as so-called enlightenment in 21st century. Hopefully, with the invasion of Russia in Ukraine, Democrats understood that their solidarity and their cooperation should be higher in quality and bigger in size than the one of autocrats. Regarding status of Kosovo and recognition of independence, let me say that status of Kosovo has been decided on 17th of February 2008. Legal debate has been closed on 22nd of July 2010 with the advisory opinion of International Court of Justice. And finally, in September 2012, supervision of our independence has been removed by International Steering Group comprised of 25 democratic nations. We cannot go prior to 2008, we cannot go prior to 2010, and we cannot go prior to 2012. In the letters that we've received from both President Biden and Secretary Clinton, it is very clearly said Kosovo is sovereign, independent country, full stop. Our being is fine. What is not okay are our relations with Serbia. Our relations are problematic, abnormal, and we should try to fix them. Our being is fine. Status of Kosovo is settled. Relations with Serbia need normalization. And again, President Biden made a very accurate and clear stance on this. Kosovo and Serbia need dialogue under auspices of Brussels, supported by the United States of America, for full normalization of relations via legally binding agreement centered on mutual recognition. There is a big difference from, let's say, 10 years ago. 10 years ago, the approach was that we're going to start a process. In this process, Kosovo will make concessions, and Serbia will recognize Kosovo in the end as an independent country. So, process is time-wise in its character. When you say process, it is impossible not to think of time. We are not there anymore. A tectonic shift has happened. We have moved from, let's say, time-wise approach into space-wise one. Agreement is a space with many items, but centerpiece is mutual recognition. Center is center in space. So now, when we engage in dialogue with Serbia, that has to be done with a centerpiece in mind. That is mutual recognition. And that is why there is all this nervousness in the side of Belgrade. We are doing our best to be constructive and creative, besides being committed to agreement through dialogue, but many things do not depend from us. In normalization of relations between Kosovo and Serbia, it is Serbia which should change much more than Kosovo. They should recognize our country. And then we very easily could recognize a Serbia which did recognize us. the question regarding jobs is very important, because jobs and justice has been the ticket with which we have achieved a landslide victory in February last year. That is our main promise to the people. In order to have qualitative jobs, we need to link professional education with labor market. We have huge skills gap in Kosovo. Hundreds of students each year graduate international law, political science, economics, international relations, and so on and so forth. But there are no jobs in the market for them. Many in these last 2 decades have left mainly to Germany. In Germany alone, we have registered 400,000 Kosovar Albanians. What we want to do is sort of a sweet revenge to Germany. We want to take German model so people don't have to go to Germany. They call it dual education model, which means that perhaps half of the days of the week, students and pupils spent at the enterprise where they practice their knowledge that they get at school. And in this way, we launch the concept of non-academic professionalism. You do not have to be an academic to become a professional. When the financial crisis hit the West in fall 2008, Germany did best, precisely because of this strong link between labor market and professional education. Switzerland does the same. I think that we need at least a couple of years, but we've already started by linking businesses with curriculums in our schools. And this is what will enable us to both provide jobs for youth and at the same time prevent further migration. A portion of migration will exist all of the time, and partially it's healthy. However, I don't like people to leave our country in desperate manner. I'm fine if they leave our country for a career move in a certain European or American university or corporation where they would advance even further and they cannot do it back home, but not to leave out of desperation. For this, we need more jobs, but also to increase the salary in private sector. Currently, paradoxically, the average salary is higher in public sector than in private sector. And I believe that we have launched a project with which we could change this. Sovereign fund is one of the ideas for which a working group compiled a concept document, and this working group was led by an Albanian-American professor in Virginia Tech, Besnik Pulja. For strategy for energy, 2022-2031, for strategy for security, for developmental bank, for sovereign fund, we are expecting input of our professors, professionals, and experts abroad. So, in this sense, a lot can be done for Kosovo without coming to Kosovo. There are certain things that you could help and contribute without coming to Kosovo. But, of course, I want you to come. So, let's make a pledge that I will come here as often as possible, and you do likewise.
And my question is to whether Kosovo will be seeking NATO membership.
I'm sorry for not answering this because for me perhaps was so apparent the answer that I forgot to enunciate it. So Kosovo certainly wants to join NATO as soon as possible. We have allocated 1.3% of GDP as budget for defense. We are still far from 2%, which is a NATO criteria, but within this mandate, I believe we can reach that. But towards NATO membership, the first milestone is Partnership for Peace program.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. It's a privilege and honor to have you here. Okay, now it's good. My name is Milan Tahire, and I am a math professor at Manchester Community College and Central Connecticut State University. As a former year colleague, dear Prime Minister, I have studied at the same university like you, electrotechnics, electronics, 1986, 1992. And I remember very good as today, 1997, when we were, besides you, in those protests with white shirts to reopen our institution that were occupied from Serbia. And from that day, I have followed you, and always I was proud of your work. And thank you for what you have done for our people. Thank you.
So with that, I'm going to let the Prime Minister close the last question about the Council of Europe. And Mickey Mouse is telling me that we're past time. So I want to once again just thank everybody on our behalf of my family, our friends at the World Affairs Forum, all of you online who made the time, and all of you who will review this recording and I'm sure critique it. I welcome everybody again to future events with the World Affairs Forum, and I'll let the Prime Minister close and I'll exit stage left.
Thank you very much for the question. I do not have any new information regarding how internal dynamics within Council of Europe are developing. However, I know that for Montenegro it took 1 year, for Bosnia and Herzegovina it took 7 years, but I believe that members of Council of Europe understand the urgency of inclusion of Kosovo, of accepting our request and wish, and in this way provide people of Kosovo, in one hand, with the recognition of our respect and estimation of human rights, and on the other hand, at the same time, enabling citizens of Kosovo to have access in the future to Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg, which is also a beacon of Europe when it relates to human rights and equality of all citizens of our continent. Thank you very much for attending today and for the support and contribution.
So, if I may, just to close out the evening, it's been, we're so honored to have spent time with you tonight. It's been a long-standing tradition at the World Affairs Forum to share a book with our guest speakers, and we picked out one, the title of which struck me as apt, How We Win. And I think the Prime Minister has demonstrated tonight how we win. Thank you all for coming.